Putin's speech. One thing that Russia ought to do right away, and this is part of liquidating the heritage of Medvedev, you can't roll back the Libyan events, right? Remember, Ambassador Chamov of the Russian Federation said, Medvedev, you're a traitor. And Mr. Shevchenko, Comrade Shevchenko there of the Russian media, is somebody who also went on the radio and said the same thing. It's time for Russia to exit the sanctions regime on Iran. And I remember I still was invited from time to time to Russia Today back in the spring of 2010, and it must have been April 1st, and they told me, guess what? Russia has just joined the West in sanctions against Russia, and my response was, this must be an April Fool joke. But it was true. Medvedev made it possible. Maybe he'd been listening to Deep Purple. And as a matter of fact, when Medvedev cavorted with Deep Purple, these British degenerate musicians, this was right as the bombing of Libya started. So you can see Medvedev sitting in Moscow listening to Deep Purple while the jets were in the skies over Libya. You get the idea. So thank God for Putin. I think of the alternatives also in that area. But one obvious thing to do is to end the Iran sanctions regime. Just break it up. If Russia exits, then it's all over. And I think similarly, you're going to see a hardening of the Russian line on Syria, which I hope we can get to now in our final segment. The Washington Post of today, Anne Applebaum, right? She's nothing but the wife of the Polish foreign minister Sikorski, and she's got her contribution today. Russia unveiled. And she wants to have a policy of economic warfare. We got to move NATO forces from Germany to the alliance's eastern border. We've got to go after the Russians through tax shelters, money laundering, and change the energy policy. And in this article, she often tells you that she's the wife of the provocative anti-Russian incendiary Sikorsky, but there she is. So you get the idea. It's also interesting. Some Russian deputies have talked about expropriating Western property in Russia if they go too far with the sanctions. What could come out of this, and one scenario, is the end of globalization. In other words, if the national states reassert themselves in the way that we're seeing with Russia, they could do things like say all Western derivatives are banned and then refuse to pay them. And they've just been given a nudge, right? 2 of the 3 principal ratings agencies have now downgraded the outlook on Russian debt. Well, that's just fine. Learn to live with that. Why not look into the tax returns and other possible criminal activity of the officials of some of those credit ratings agencies and see if it's not possible to put an end to their provocations through some legal means. And all of that is stuff that can go in the right direction. And don't invite Deep Purple to your dacha so that they can begin poisoning the mind of your son. Brzezinski is trying to push the idea this morning on Morning Joe with his daughter Mika that Putin is some kind of a mystic, that he's an eccentric or a narcissist, and he talks about some not better identified teacher of Putin. And what can this be? There are 2 people. One is his Putin's teacher, Vera Gurevich, in the St. Petersburg area, has published some reminiscences. There's nothing strange in there. And then we have Tikhon Shevkunov, his confessor, right, his duchovnik, directeur de conscience of Putin. But I don't detect any element of mysticism of any kind, or irrationality, or irrationalism of any kind in this speech. This is more substantive than Obama. Putin can afford to be much more substantive than Obama. It's all fact-based, as Stephen Cohen confessed. It's all fact-based, and it's a compelling argument. Even the Washington Post has some guy today confessing, well, Putin actually has a case, although we don't agree with a lot of it. But he's got some things on his side, right? A grudging kind of admission. And in reality, Putin is more fact-based than these policies in the West. We're getting the background now. Truth Dig. Take a look at Truth Dig. Truth Dig has the story about how Abby Martin was brought in. Or I'm sorry, not so much Abby Martin, but Liz Wall, and this was done by some neocons. We're told a bunch of neocons, and they're people who have they've been trying to gin up military conflicts. Take a look at Truth Dig. I won't go through the names because these people are not well known, but you get the idea. I would also, if you want to see the intellectual bankruptcy of Abby Martin, I can point you to a really imbecilic interview where Abby Martin interviews Jesse Ventura about tax policy, and Jesse says that he's for the national sales tax, and she thinks that's a great idea. This is awful. The whole point of a sales tax is if you have to make purchases, you pay tax on that. So it means that with the national sales tax, the tax burden is shifted to the lower incomes because the poor people have to spend all their income on food, clothing, shelter, whereas the rich parasites and predators spend a very small percentage of what they take in and use the rest to buy derivatives. And as we know, up to now, unless and until we implement the urgent 1% Wall Street sales tax on stocks, bonds, and derivatives, on derivative purchases right now, you don't pay any tax. So Abby Martin thinks it's groovy and dreamy for Jesse Ventura to say, let's have the national sales tax. And this is a level of imbecility that I have seldom seen. But now, let's shift our view to Syria. Preface this with the Washington Post headline of the first week in March that Assad is taking advantage, that he feels now that with Russia under attack, more or less, with color revolutions and sanctions and destabilizations, that Russia is going to have to stick with its friends no matter what, and Syria is clearly one of those. So the bond between Syria and Russia is not going to be broken by Western action. And therefore, he's getting ready to have an election later this year and get himself reelected. Well, civil wars, right? Judging from the American one of 150 years ago, civil wars can sometimes go on for about 4 years. That's the model here. We've just passed the 3-year mark. So is there a perspective that Assad can mop up the terrorist rebels within the next 12 months? Yes. City of Yabrud on the Lebanese border has fallen. And this morning, the castle, Le Krach des Chevaliers, the Crusader Castle, has also been liberated from the terrorist gang. Back in a minute with more on this World Crisis Radio. Welcome back. It's the final segment of this edition of World Crisis Radio, coming to you from Washington on the 21st of March. We don't have time for domestic today, but the analysis I gave about Sink in Florida getting beaten by a reactionary Republican is there's a pale echo of that with Eugene Robinson on the Washington Post of March 18th. Go bold or go home, and that's for Sink. How could you get yourself defeated, Sink? Well, by being weak and equivocal on Obamacare and other issues. And by the way, the Obamacare deadline is coming up, so let me join my voice to people who say, if you don't have health insurance, you should sign up and get it. Get that subsidy. That's your economic right. Get a subsidy. Get, if you can find a decent policy there, get it. And if you're young, you're going to have sports injuries. You're going to fall off a motorcycle. You're going to OD on your recreational substances there. And all of those things will land you in the emergency room. And it's not free. There is a law much hated by Governor Deal of Georgia, which says the hospital has to treat you, but they'll also send you a bill, and your credit will be ruined for the rest of your life. So why not sign up for Obamacare, which apparently you can't do after March 31st. There's an open season every year. I think that's crazy. It should be you should be able to sign up for this any time, but fact is you can't. Anyway, Syria. Yabrud, key supply line coming in from Lebanon, from the various anti-Syrian NATO puppets there in Lebanon, the Hariri faction. That's been captured, and Le Crac des Chevaliers, which is this matchless reconnaissance tower that allows you to see over large parts of this border area. Acting out of military weakness, the U.S. has closed the Syrian embassy and the Syrian consulates. It's the new guy, I think his name is Rubinstein, has replaced the death squad expert Ford. So he shut down the consulates. This is a pathetic, impotent gesture of rage and frustration. And the Israelis are back in the mix, bombing the Syrian army. But I think these are two contemptible efforts, right? They're impotent and odious. The U.S. closes the consulates. The Israelis do the bombing. Now, what's actually going on? I lean to some extent on this guy, Joshua Landis, out in Oklahoma, who follows the stuff. Notice that there's this clash between Saudis and Qatar. Qatar wants the Al Jazeera shut down. But according to Landis, the Saudis are in the process of dumping many of the most radical terrorist groups operating in Syria, and some of those are going back to Europe or the United States. That can spell terrorism here, but they are leaving Syria. Hopefully didn't get sophisticated weapons. And Landis stresses that the terrorist rebels are divided and anti-American, and therefore it's still impossible to get at least the Congress to vote for it, although the CIA may be doing it behind their back. So the Saudis splitting from Qatar, the Saudis much disaffected, apparently dumping. The government is dumping some of the radical groups, but Saudi individuals continue to send money. Turkey is getting cold feet. They're not available as a automatic avenue of logistical support for these terrorist rebels. And I would also point to this fact: if it's true that Doku Umarov, the leader of the Chechens, the terrorists, if he's been killed, then that indicates a severe disruption of the Chechen network that was backing up the Syrian terrorists. And we were told by a couple of sources that the Chechens were the most effective of all fighters. They were the craziest, they were the most aggressive, the most bloodthirsty. So the ISIS, the Islamic Emirate of Iraq and Sham, has been expelled by the Nusra Front, and I think also by the Islamic Front, from some key areas that they were holding. They've been driven back to Raqqa in the far northeast of the country. And, well, if it's a civil war, it's not uncommon for civil wars to have no political solution, but only a military one. The American Civil War ended with military solutions when Lee surrendered to Grant and when Joe Johnston surrendered to Sherman. That's when it ended.